Welcome back. Today we are undertaking a really critical deep dive into invasion ecology.
We are. We're tackling one of the field's most, let's say, stubborn problems: prediction.
Exactly. Which non-native species, out of the thousands introduced globally, will become truly destructive ecological threats? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
So we're unpacking a seminal 2013 review paper by Anthony Ricciardi and his colleagues. It's titled Progress Toward Understanding the Ecological Impacts of Non-Native Species.
A really influential piece.
For you, the listener, this is kind of the shortcut to understanding why forecasting that ecological damage is so incredibly difficult.
And how Ricciardi basically synthesized 19 competing hypotheses into something like a blueprint for future research.
It's maybe helpful to set the scene a bit. Where was the science when this paper came out?
Yeah, good point. We'd actually gotten pretty good, I'd say, at understanding the first half of the invasion process.
You mean how a species gets established and spreads? Colonization success.
Yeah.
Exactly, colonization success. But the second half, our ability to actually forecast where and when that species will exert severe ecological impact, well, that remained weak. Still kind of does, in many ways.
And that gap, that forecasting gap, is the real bottleneck, right? For management, for deciding where to put resources.
It's the single biggest bottleneck. It hampers effective management, prioritizing conservation funds, all of it.
That inefficiency is the core issue, really. If we can't tell a genuine ecological disaster from, a minor nuisance, we just end up wasting resources.
Precisely.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with definitions. Before you can even talk about predicting impact, Ricciardi and the team had to agree on what impact actually means.
Right, and they adopted a purely ecological scientific definition, which is important because it shifts the focus away from sort of subjective human judgments.
So no more just calling things pests.
Basically, yeah, ecological impact is defined simply as a measurable change to the properties of an ecosystem by a non-native species.
Measurable change.
Okay.
And this definition is critical. It acknowledges two things. First, every non-native species has some impact, positive or negative, just by being there, by being part of the system.
Right, it has to interact somehow.
And second, it moves past that kind of arbitrary labeling of species as pests or problems. The impact exists on a measurable, continuous scale.
Okay, so it's measurable,
Right.
but to make that scale usable, scientists need a metric, a way to quantify it.
And the formula that really organizes this whole discussion, it was established by Parker and colleagues back in 1999. It's actually quite simple. 1 R times A times E.
$1 is the overall ecological impact. That's the total effect we're trying to understand.
Got it.
Dollar is the range, so the total geographical area the species occupies.
How widespread it is.
Exactly. $A is abundance. That's the numbers or maybe the biomass of the species per unit area. How many are there?
Okay, range, abundance, and $8. And $8 is the per capita effect. This is the crucial one, the specific effect caused by one single individual of that species.
Okay. That seems like a really elegant framework. Y all equal R times A times E. But here's my practical challenge. If we're trying to manage invasions on a large scale, say, across a whole continent, we can probably measure $2 an hour. Use satellite imagery, do rapid surveys, count things.
Yeah, those are more logistically feasible.
But if the effect of just one organism is the most critical factor, how can resource managers possibly measure that specific functional effect, that toxicity or whatever it is, on a huge scale without spending decades on every single introduced species?
That right there is precisely the core intellectual and practical challenge this entire review paper is trying to address. As you said, most inferences about potential damage, historically and often still now, rely almost entirely on $2 an hour, just because they're easier to measure.
Right, easier data to get.
But Ricciardi's work, and the work it synthesizes, confirms that the most critical factor, the least understood, and the most difficult one to actually isolate, is the per capita effect.
So a really widespread plant might have a dollar close to zero.
Exactly. While a very localized fungus, maybe in just one valley, might have a dollar so strong it could collapse an entire tree genus in that area.
Wow. So we really have to identify the underlying mechanisms that boost or suppress that $1 factor.
That's the goal. What controls $1?
Okay, that leads us directly to some of the, counterintuitive findings in the paper about prediction itself. What unexpected patterns did they actually find when they looked at the data on invasions?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. They found two major paradoxes, things that kind of go against common assumptions.
Okay.
First, they observed what they called an inverse magnitude-frequency relationship.
Magnitude frequency?
It means that the really huge impacts, the ecosystem-altering events, the massive disruptions, they happen much less frequently than small, common, maybe even negligible impacts.
Oh, right. So it's like natural hazards like earthquakes or major floods. Small tremors happen all the time. The big one is rare.
Exactly like that. It's the same statistical pattern.
So hang on. That means we probably allocate most of our policy attention and our resources to managing the common low magnitude stuff.
Mm-hmm. The everyday nuisances.
But it's the rare high-impact events that actually fundamentally change the ecosystem in the long run.
Precisely. And it creates this massive psychological challenge for policymakers, doesn't it? Because the events that cause the most damage are the ones that are hardest to justify spending big money against because they happen so rarely.
They're like ecological black swan events, totally unpredictable, massive consequence.
That's a perfect analogy for us.
Okay, that's one paradox. What was the second one? You said it was even more disruptive to traditional thinking.
Yes. This one is the disconnect between invasion success and actual impact.
Success meaning?
Success meaning how well a species establishes or spreads. So, high $300 and $1. Range and abundance.
Okay, so the disconnect is?
They found surprisingly little correlation between a species' invasion success, how widespread or abundant it becomes, and the actual magnitude of its ecological impact.
Well, really? So high visibility doesn't equal high danger.
Yeah.
You're saying a species can be everywhere, super abundant, and still be functional, kind of a non-event ecologically.
That's absolutely what the evidence suggests, yeah. Think about the common dandelion, Taraxacum officinale.
Right. It's everywhere. Lawns, fields.
Exactly. One of the most widespread and abundant plants across temperate continents. Yet, it rarely causes wholesale disruption to fundamental ecosystem processes. It's there, but it doesn't usually crash the system.
Okay, contrast that with
a species like the Asian clam, Panocorbula amurensis. In somewhere like San Francisco Bay, it might be, patchily distributed in parts of the bay, maybe not super abundant everywhere, so its $2 might seem moderate. But it's an incredibly efficient filter feeder. Its per capita effect, its $1, is enormous. It can dramatically change water column dynamics, nutrient cycling, the whole food web locally.
So low R and A, but huge E gives you a significant I, at least locally.
Exactly. It completely decouples establishment success from impact magnitude.
Which means just counting bodies, just measuring dollar and dollars really isn't enough. You absolutely have to understand the specific functional role a species plays.
And how novel that role is in the new environment.
Right. Novelty seems key. And you also mentioned that this functional impact isn't fixed, right? It varies.
Hugely. It varies across space and time. We call that context dependency.
What drives that variation?
Well, local variables are a big part of it. Things like nutrient levels, temperature, whether specific prey are available. All these affect the invader's peak performance at $.
Makes sense.
But what's also really interesting is that the invasion history of the community itself matters.
How so?
Well, if a community has already been hit by multiple invaders over time, the native species that are left might actually represent a sort of hardened core. They're the survivors.
So they might be more resistant to the next invader.
Potentially, yes. Especially if the new invader is functionally similar to previous ones. The community might have developed some resistance, making it harder for the newcomer to have a large impact.
Okay, so given these really tricky paradoxes, big impacts are rare, abundance doesn't predict destruction, and context matters hugely. The enormous task Ricciardi took on was synthesizing these 19 different hypotheses that ecologists were using to try and explain all this variation and impact.
19 is a lot, yeah. It shows how complex the field was and is.
How did they even approach organizing that complexity?
They grouped them into conceptual categories. The main goal was to isolate the factors that specifically modify that per capita effect, the dollar factor.
Makes sense. Can we maybe focus on the categories that seem to offer the most sort of robust insights, the ones we should really pay attention to?
Absolutely. There are about 4 key areas highlighted in the review that have strong support and seem crucial for moving forward.
Okay, let's start with the idea of just being fundamentally different, the niche-based hypotheses. What happens when an invader brings truly novel functions to an ecosystem?
That's often where you see the really major impacts, especially through what they call novel resource use.
Like using resources differently than any native species does?
Exactly. The classic examples involve non-native nitrogen-fixing plants moving into nutrient-poor systems, like certain grasslands or heathlands.
Plants that can pull nitrogen from the air.
Right. They fundamentally alter nutrient availability in a way that the native community, which evolved under nitrogen limitation, simply cannot cope with. It can trigger wholesale changes, sometimes even turning grasslands into shrublands over time. It changes the whole ecosystem structure.
And often linked to that is the idea of novel weapons, right? Sounds dramatic. What does that mean ecologically?
It sounds dramatic, but it's a useful concept. It refers to unique biochemicals or physical defenses or maybe even behavioral traits that native species simply haven't evolved any defenses against.
So it's often a chemical advantage. Allopathy in plants, maybe?
Allopathy is a great example in plants. In the animal kingdom, think about the cane toad, Bufo marinus, in Australia.
Oh, yeah, the classic example.
Classic, tragic example. It releases potent bufotoxin secretions from glands on its back. Native predators like goannas, snakes, quolls, they have zero evolutionary experience with this type of high-level toxin in their prey.
So they try to eat it.
They try to eat it, and they often die almost instantly. The toxin is a novel weapon that causes massive predator population crashes, even if the toad populations themselves aren't always astronomically high in certain areas.
This idea of evolutionary mismatch, it sounds like one of the strongest predictors they found. The concept of evolutionary naivete.
It is. And it's definitely one of the 4 key determinants that Ricciardi and colleagues identified as having really broad support for predicting impact.
So the impact is strongest when the community just lacks any evolutionary experience with organisms that function in a similar way.
Precisely. The devastation non-native predators cause to island fauna is the textbook case, isn't it?
Right, because island species often evolved without any mammalian predators at all.
Exactly. They lack effective defensive behaviors. They're just naive.
What about a good example in an aquatic system? Is it just islands?
No, not at all. Look at the zebra mussel invasion in North America, the Dreissena mussels.
Ah, yes. Covered everything.
They're biofouling mollusks, meaning they cement themselves to hard surfaces in incredibly high densities, and they filter huge volumes of water very rapidly.
Okay.
Now, North American freshwater mussels, the native ones, they evolved in the complete absence of any organism with this dominant high-density biofouling lifestyle. There was nothing like it.
So they had no defense?
None. Consequently, the zebra mussels just decimated native mussel populations, competed for food, physically smothered them by settling on their shells. It was that profound evolutionary naivete that created such a massive, catastrophic impact.
Okay, moving from those individual traits in evolutionary history to the community level, one of the most powerful and, frankly, kind of terrifying concepts they reviewed is invasional meltdown.
Meltdown. Yeah, it's a worrying one. It happens when non-native species actually facilitate each other. They help each other out.
Leading to synergistic impact.
Exactly. The joint effect of 2 or more invaders becomes much greater than just adding up their individual effects. As more invaders arrive and interact, they can accelerate the disruption exponentially.
Can we look again at that Great Lakes example? Because you mentioned the mussels, but there was more to it, wasn't there? It shows how one interaction can cascade.
Yes, the Great Lakes situation is a grimly perfect example. So, first invader, the Eurasian dry-sid mussels, zebra, and quagga. Hyper-efficient filter feeders.
Yeah, they clear the water.
Dramatically clarify the water, yes. And they concentrate nutrients in their waste products, their pseudofeces, right on the lake bottom.
Okay, stage 1.
This, in turn, facilitates the second invader.
Yeah.
The round goby, a bottom-dwelling fish from the same region which happens to love eating the mussels.
Ah, a new food source.
A concentrated, readily available, new food source on the lake bed. Now, these conditions clear water, concentrated nutrients near the bottom. Warmer temperatures in some areas created a perfect storm, essentially, for a rare strain of Clostridium botulinum bacteria, type E botulism.
Oh, wow.
And because the gobies were eating huge numbers of mussels, which had filtered and potentially concentrated the bacteria or its spores, the toxin biomagnified up the food chain. Gobies eat mussels, birds eat gobies. Resulting in recurring massive outbreaks of avian botulism that killed tens of thousands of migratory waterfowl loons, grebes, gulls, and fish-eating fish as well.
So the mussels created the right conditions and concentrated the source, and the goby acted as the delivery system up the food chain. That's, yeah, a powerful illustration of synergy.
It really is.
And this idea stands in pretty sharp contrast to an older ecological idea, biotic resistance, doesn't it?
It does. Biotic resistance is the idea that highly diverse, healthy native communities should be inherently more resistant to invasion and therefore to impact because there are fewer empty niches for invaders to exploit.
Sounds intuitive. More players on the field, harder for a newcomer to dominate.
It's intuitively appealing, for sure. But the review points out that the empirical evidence is actually quite mixed. Sometimes diversity helps resist impact. Sometimes it doesn't seem to matter much.
What matters more then?
Often, external abiotic factors seem more critical. Things like pollution levels, habitat degradation, nutrient loading, how stressed the system is already. Those can override the effects of diversity alone in determining community resistance.
Okay, finally, let's quickly cover the hypotheses centered on the environment itself and just sheer numbers, starting with environmental matching.
Right. This is another one of the 4 strongly supported determinants. Basically, the impact an invader can have is constrained by how well the new environment suits it. Environmental suitability.
So it needs the right conditions to perform well.
Exactly. Peak functional performance, meaning the highest per capita effect, the highest dollar, only happens when the new environment closely matches the species' physiological optimum. Temperature, salinity, nutrients, whatever it needs.
So a potentially nasty species introduced somewhere way outside its comfort zone might just fizzle out or have a very low impact.
Precisely. Its dollars will be dampened regardless of its inherent destructive potential back home or in a better matched environment.
And the last key one, maybe the simplest concept, but also strongly supported, propagool pressure.
Propagool pressure. It sounds technical, but it just refers to the number, the composition, and the frequency of individuals being introduced. How many arrive, how often, and are they healthy?
And we know high propagool pressure helps a species get established in the first place.
Right, that's well established. But Ricciardi's review confirms it also correlates strongly with impact magnitude.
Why would more arrivals increase the impact? Is it just bigger populations faster?
That's part of it. High influx helps the population overcome challenges that small populations face, like ALE affects trouble finding mates, for instance, or just bad luck, random environmental fluctuations wiping them out when numbers are low. More immigrants means faster population growth, hitting those high alder values sooner. And potentially, a higher propagool pressure also increases the chance of introducing particularly harmful genotypes, maybe individuals that are more aggressive or better adapted to the new environment.
So more shots on goal, and maybe some of those shots are harder.
Good analogy, yeah.
What's truly fascinating here, though, is how the authors managed to take these 19 complex, sometimes competing ideas and distill them down.
They try to find the common threads.
And what did that structure look like in the end? You mentioned 4 key determinants they identified as having the broadest empirical support, the one that should really form the foundation of a general theory of impact prediction.
Yeah, they landed on 4 primary factors that seem to apply across diverse environments and different types of organisms.
Okay, let's recap them.
First, the evolutionary experience of the recipient community, basically naivete. How unfamiliar is the community with this type of organism?
Right. Number 1, naivete.
Second, local environmental constraint. How well does the environment match the invader's needs? Environmental matching.
Number 2, matching.
Third, propagool pressure. How many are arriving? How often? The sheer influx.
Number 3, influx.
And finally, number 4, novel traits. This covers both novel weapons and novel resource use. Does the invader bring something functionally new to the table?
Number 4, novelty. Okay, so naivete, matching, influx, and novelty. Those are the big 4.
According to the synthesis, yes. Those are the factors that consistently seem to matter most and should be the focus for building better predictive models.
But even with these strong determinants identified, the field obviously still has limitations. What were the major challenges the authors flagged that ecologists still need to figure out?
Well, a major limitation they noted is simply the lack of enough empirical data to rigorously test many of the specific mechanistic hypotheses, especially the ones trying to pin down variations in a dollar, or the per capita effect.
Yeah.
We need more experiments, more detailed studies.
And there's also a bias in what gets studied, right?
Definitely. Significant taxonomic bias. For example, there's a well-known hypothesis called AITS, the evolution of increased competitive ability. It suggests invaders might evolve to be stronger competitors in their new range because they leave their old enemies behind. But it's almost exclusively been studied in plants. So how generally applicable is it to animals or fungi or microbes? We don't really know yet. That bias limits generalizability.
And then there's the elephant in the room, the critical challenge that seems to influence almost every finding in invasion ecology. distinguishing between an invader being a driver of change versus just a passenger.
Ah, yes. The driver versus passenger problem. That uncertainty is pervasive.
Can you explain that distinction quickly?
Sure. Is the non-native species the sole cause of the ecological changes we see? Is it the driver? Or is it merely thriving because other things, other anthropogenic stressors like climate change, pollution, habitat destruction, land use change, have already weakened the native community and altered the environment?
So in the passenger scenario, the invader is just taking advantage of a system that's already broken.
Exactly. It's a symptom, not the primary cause. And if it's merely a passenger, then just managing the invader itself won't solve the underlying ecological problem. The system will likely remain degraded.
That's a huge challenge for management. How do you know where to focus your efforts?
It's incredibly difficult. The review strongly highlights that future research must urgently develop better methods, experimental approaches, analytical tools to partition the effects, separate the impact of the invader itself from the impact of all the background environmental degradation. We need that clarity for effective management strategies.
So what does this all mean then? Taking this whole review into account, what's the path forward for managing non-native species?
Well, it clearly means we have to mature beyond just tracking those basic abundance metrics, $1 trillion. Counting isn't enough.
Right.
The Ricciardi paper really provides a clear roadmap. It calls for research to explicitly study the variation in that per capita effect, $1. Why does it differ so much between species and even within species across different environments?
And also looking beyond the direct effects.
Yes, and developing frameworks that tackle the complex, indirect, often cascading effects of invasions, like that botulism example. A predictive understanding really requires deeply integrating the functional ecology of the invader, its novel traits, its dialers with the specific structure, the context, and the evolutionary history of the recipient community. It's about the interaction.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, thinking about the potential risks out there, what should we leave our listeners mulling over?
I think we absolutely have to come back to that concept of invasional meltdown and couple it with the often significant time lag that exists between a species first establishing and when it actually reaches its peak impact.
That lag can be long, right? Decades.
Decades, sometimes even a century or more for long-lived species like trees. So if these synergistic meltdown effects are common, and we know there are these long lags, we have to consider this possibility. What unrecognized combinations of non-native species might be quietly interacting, facilitating each other in our local ecosystems right now?
Building up potential.
It's exactly. Building potential that could, maybe quite suddenly, lead to a rapid acceleration of impact in the near future when some threshold is crossed or another key species arrives. The long-term compounding nature of that risk, kind of hidden from view by the magnitude-frequency paradox in these time lags, that's perhaps the single most difficult and unsettling challenge we face in invasion ecology. What future meltdowns are currently brewing undetected?